Getting individuals and teams to bring the best of who they are, not just who we want them to be, to the table is far more productive and successful than the strategies we currently employ. In an effort to maintain absolute control, our current strategies reduce our efficiency and enthusiasm, and limit our capacity to fully harness our skill sets and talents. Who we are and how we came to write this book. For much of our professional lives, we have worked as strategic and creative leaders in what may be described as the world's largest psychological experiment, the advertising industry. Certainly, advertising has access to research, sample sizes, and cross-cultural results that the academic and clinical worlds cannot come close to. Nor have we been limited, occasionally to our shame, by issues such as ethics, conscience, or a moral compass, whatever that is. However, this has, for the most part, allowed us a great impartiality in our work, an almost sociopathic detachment from values and judgments that may distort the interpretation of results. Quite ironically, it has also provided us with the ability to focus more on the truth. In our current business, the Impossible Institute, an innovation, engagement, and leadership think tank, we now work in the worlds of training, speaking, and cultural engagement and development. Here, too, we have focused more on achieving results than trying to restrict how those results are achieved to fit with our values, prejudices, or personal views of the world. It is not our goal to recreate the world in our own image. At least we don't like to admit to that in public. However, it would be wrong to assume that this results focus is synonymous within the commercial world. It is quite the contrary, in fact. We had assumed that moving from the cloistered worlds of school and university education into the commercial world would enable us to focus more on results and the accumulation of hard data from which we could extrapolate meaning and process. We expected a greater bottom-line emphasis versus the more methodological tendencies of the academic world we all grew up in. It surprised us that this was not the case at all. The commercial world does, of course, want to lead, influence, and persuade both its staff and its customers. It also clearly wants bottom-line results. However, it is also oddly obsessed with the need to control and dictate how those results are achieved. In other words, it wants to be both rich and right, a conflict that not only limits success, but also prejudices people's capacity and willingness to contribute to society as a whole. While we don't wish to appear too Machiavellian in our description of ourselves, neither do we want to suggest that the existing system is quite as noble as it may like to portray itself. What we have found is that our current systems of leadership and process for building cultures and performance are far more judgmental and limiting, and in fact, more values-biased than they may first appear. This tendency to want to control how a result is achieved, and hence people's behavior and process, as opposed to aligning the result with the values and the pre-existing motivations of the people involved, turns out to be immensely frustrating. Not simply for the people involved in the process, but also for the people leading them, their co-workers, customers, students, and other people working around them. What's perhaps more disturbing is that this practice of forcing people to conform to unnatural processes at odds with human nature is virtually universal. We have witnessed it in clients on almost every continent, in every business, educational and government sector, and in innovation projects, cultural audits, personal development, and the coaching and mentoring we conduct with leaders of various genders, cultures, ages, and persuasions. In fact, this pattern of trying to create change in line with an imagined noble intent has actually led to some pretty awful, large-scale, and ignoble results. This leads us to the central question of this book. What really drives human behavior? In answering this question, our approach has tended more towards quantitative research than qualitative, though both have informed our conclusions. We have relied less on what human beings say and focused more on what they do, so as not to be biased by our own values or expectations, or theirs. This being said, we have as much as possible tried to include research and case studies from our own experience and what we have gained firsthand.